This is the Silver Divorce Podcast, brought to you from the Whitfield Media Group studios in Chattanooga, Tennessee. We're here to offer education, stories, and support for people age 50 plus who are considering or facing divorce. I'm your host, Lisa. But before we get started, hey, I'd like to ask you to chime in, send us your ideas, your suggestions, your questions. We'd love to hear from you. And you can email us at silverdivorcepodcast@gmail.com or join the conversation on our Facebook page at Silver Divorce Podcast and Instagram as well at Silver Divorce Podcast. And now, before we introduce our special guest, I'd like to introduce my guest host, Pat.
Hello, everyone. Well, Lisa, I am personally super excited about the special guest we have on today's episode and the topic we will be discussing. It is all about raising your relational IQ, and it will certainly be interesting.
Wonderful. I can't wait to dive in. But before we start, as we always do, we talk about out of the house. We started that feature so that you can get to know us a little bit better. And then also, because singles tend to isolate a little bit after divorce, we want to give you some ideas and spark some thought as to what you can do to start enjoying your new single life. So I'll start. You know, one of the things is that most people our age is we don't like change. And especially when it comes to our personal care, such as our hair.
Yeah.
And we tend to have gone to the same person for many years. Well, this week I decided that I was going to make a change, and it's going to be one of the things that I do differently. I saw an ad for a brand new salon called Cuts and Fades, and decided to stop in. And it was a wonderful woman-owned business, but it was a young girl. She was just getting on her feet, 3 months into it, and it was the first day that she had a second stylist there who had just relocated to Chattanooga from Nashville. So it was a wonderful experience. We had a great conversation about how they each came to do what they were doing in Chattanooga. Talked about divorce and where I was in the podcast, but then I was able to really help them with their Facebook presence and Instagram, and talk to them about TikTok, and I gave them a marketing 101 session. So I ended up, what should have been like a 30-minute in and out, ended up being quite a long time, and I was so glad that I stopped. So just encouraging you to, keep trying new things and doing things differently. Yeah. So let's podcast. And today we're going to dive into the topic of how to gain relational intelligence. You may have heard of it as it's something that we use to connect with people and build strong, long-lasting relationships. It's different from emotional intelligence, which you may have heard about, which that helps us to understand our emotions, the emotions of others, and how to manage emotions successfully. The two really are interconnected, and our guest has packed a powerful message into her book, Foolproofing Your Life.
Well, Lisa, I am very excited to welcome our special guest host, Jan Silvious. Jan has been helping people for more than 30 years as a life coach, author of 11 books, as well as a keynote speaker at national and international conferences and seminars. She was a contributor to a live call-in radio program, Midday Connection, on Moody Radio, and co-hosted the national radio program, Precept Live. She has helped thousands of people get from where they are to where they want to be. And Jan, we're so glad you're here.
Thank you. It's great to be with you all.
This particular book had a tremendous impact on my life, especially after my divorce. I also offer this book to participants in my divorce care class, and it has helped so many gain new understanding of their relationship. And I knew we had to have you on as a guest to share this message, Jan, with everyone going through the trauma and separation of divorce.
Well, this book came out of my working with people, couples, two people, whether it was a married couple or a mother and a daughter or brother, sister. It was always two people, and it was two people, one who wanted to get better,
Yeah.
and then one who said, I don't have a problem. and so right there, you had an issue. And so, and they would come to see me, and when they would come to see me, the one who was willing to do anything, truly was willing to do anything, and then the one who was over it before the session was 15 minutes over, because usually we had honed in, not usually, always we had honed in on something that needed to be changed, needed to be addressed, needed to be called out in their life, and they didn't want to hear it. And so you will find relationally that some people want to get along relationally and some people just don't.
Well, that's a tough starting point, right? When one person is like, there's nothing wrong, and the other person is, I'm about ready to tear out my hair and file for divorce.
Exactly.
And so where do you go from there?
Well, that's a great question. Where do you go from there? And usually you go with the one who, well, always you go with the one who is willing.
Yeah.
Because the one who is not willing, that's why I wrote Foolproofing, because the biblical fool or the narcissist, or that we call them today, but the person who always thinks they're right, who uses anger to control, and who trusts in their own hearts, that person isn't going to go forward.
Yeah,
you can just depend on it.
I found it really fascinating that the concept of fool, as you mentioned, being biblical, and also the number of times when I read your book and you referenced all of the scriptures where a fool is mentioned, it really hits you. I had no idea. So I would be really interested to hear, when did that strike you as, all of these characteristics and symptoms were very similar, and that the answer was there in the Bible?
Well, it struck me because I was working with these folks that I was seeing a pattern in. They would come in, there would be one willing, one not willing, and the not willing had similar characteristics always. The major one was they always thought they were right. And if you're always right, you never have to confess and you never have to repent, because I'm right. And if I'm right, you're always wrong.
And they think nothing's wrong, I guess.
Exactly. And well, if you're always right, there's nothing wrong.
That's right.
And so it's a mindset. It's a personality disorder. I mean, it is a lot of things all rolled into one. But the bottom line is, and it is narcissistic, if you want to put it in psychological terms, it is totally narcissistic. And so you see the narcissist, you see the fool, but God had that pegged a long time ago in Proverbs, which it made me giggle. When I began to read through Proverbs, I thought, God, these are people I'm seeing all the time. And it was as if he tapped me on the shoulder, proverbially. He tapped me on the shoulder and said, I've been trying to tell you this. I've got the answer right here.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
That was so apparent when I read the book. I'm like, dang, why didn't I see that sooner? When you really call it out that way, it really is different.
I thought, dang, why didn't I see it sooner too? Because I had been struggling with, is this really right to call somebody out like that? Is that kind? Is that good? And then it's like, well, yeah, it is, because God calls them out.
That's right.
And the other thing I like about it is that you hear the term narcissist so much that people tend to tune it out. It's kind of like the flavor of the day.
It is.
But if you use the word fool, that puts a whole different perspective on it, and people tend to listen because they haven't heard it in that way. So I really like that.
And two, it's like a 4-letter word. People don't like to be called a fool either.
No, it's a stir stick.
Yeah.
I mean, you say fool, you're going to get a response. I've had people throw the book, Foolproofing Your Life, throw the book across the room, leave it on the airplane. I mean, I've had all kinds of stories. I have letter after letter of people who have had somebody in their family read the book, or they put brown paper around the book to try to hide the title. because the word fool is inflammatory.
Yeah.
Well, that's when you know you've struck a nerve.
Exactly.
If they're throwing the book, you know that they've seen themselves in that book.
Well,
Yeah. So let's dive in a little bit about the book. I was hooked because as I mentioned, the message applied to so many different types of relationships in our lives. And you describe the symptoms of a person entangled with a fool. Would you share those symptoms and how our listeners can recognize the warning signs that they're entangled with a fool?
Well, I would say the major symptom is that you're put down. You're denigrated. A fool always puts you down because, remember, they always have to be right. So if you're consistently put down, then you are dealing with someone who always has to be right. The reason they always have, and I say always, it's in a pretty consistent manner. There may be moments of niceness, but those moments of niceness are always with a manipulation involved. And so basically you're dealing with someone who always has to put you down. And that's the primary sign.
Well, I know, I don't know if it was in Foolproofing. In one of your books, you talk about the honeymoon cycle and how they manipulate you. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yes, there is the honeymoon cycle, and it's very similar to the abusive cycle that people often read about.
Yeah.
It starts out with everything is fine, all is well, and then there's an irritation that comes in, and then the irritation moves into a more difficult irritation where there's a fight or a bigger fight or a constant fight, and then it goes into a blow up of some sort. And then once things have blown up, then there's a quiet period, and then the honeymoon period begins again. And that's what's so stunning about it, because people go through the honeymoon period and they think, oh, everything's fine.
Right.
Everything's fine. It's all going to work out. And then the irritation begins, and then yada, yada, yada.
And,
around the circle.
and is that how they draw them back in? Is that how they keep their significant other back? Is because they go through the cycle, then they go back to the honeymoon period, and the person thinks, oh, it's going to be okay. He was just angry or upset, or he was stressed out, or they make excuses, right?
Exactly. You make excuses because you hope it's going to be okay.
Right.
And you will find this, whether this is mother, father, sister, brother, or husband, it doesn't matter what the relationship is. When you find yourself making excuses for bad behavior, you're making excuses probably for a fool or a narcissist, because they always think they're right.
You know, you really sparked something, an idea, is that when you're dating somebody, and if their personality is a fool personality, how they treat you isn't going to be special or different. They're going to treat their mother or maybe their siblings or people they work with. So maybe it is watching and recognizing those behaviors and how they're treating others, knowing that you're likely to get the same treatment, right? Is that fair?
That's fair. The outlier on that is that they usually target one person.
Okay.
They usually target one person on whom they can dump, and it's usually the person closest to them.
Wow.
And so they will be, for instance, they will be angry and ugly to a spouse and sweet to the children.
Okay.
I've seen that.
And they will be ugly and demanding of a spouse where their sisters, their brothers, their mother gets by, and they're nice to them.
They can be charismatic.
They can be very charismatic, but as soon as you cross them, they lose their charisma, and you lose your charisma. You're no longer the deal as far as they're concerned.
That might be why you hear in a divorce, people will say, oh, he was such a great guy. I don't understand it. He's so charming. And
exactly.
But that's not what the person at home experienced.
Right.
Exactly.
Why are they getting divorced? What's going on? We don't see that side.
Yeah, he was so sweet. Or she was so sweet. This goes both ways. She was so sweet. And, she was a wicked witch behind the door.
I like that.
I mean, it's just a fact.
Well, Jan, you also described the characteristics of a relationship with a fool, and it's striking how universal they are. What are some of the I can't speak today.
That's a big word.
Yeah, characteristics of a relationship that are particularly troublesome?
Well, I'm sure you're getting a lot of your questions from the book, and I haven't.
Yeah.
I hadn't read the book in a while.
I'm sure you haven't.
But I can tell you that some of the troublesome things that come out of a relationship with a fool is that there's always conflict. You're not going to get by with a fool without there being conflict. And that's troublesome because most of us want to have peace.
Right.
That's just, it's like, why can't we all get along?
No drama.
No drama. Let's have peace. Well, they can't stand it because a fool only feels when they're angry. And that's something, and I've noticed that with a narcissist too. A narcissist only feels, and when I mean feel, has emotional response when they're angry. They don't know, they're dead inside when it comes to feeling joy. Peace certainly doesn't do anything for them. And so it requires the spark of anger.
They thrive on it.
Yes, and the thriving is almost like they get a good shot of something that just ramps them up, and it's like, now.
So you may know that you're with a fool if you have to be on constant alert,
Right.
walking on eggshells.
Yeah.
You hear that frequently. I had to walk on eggshells, and I was always trying to manage things to make him or her, can go both ways, as you said, happy.
Yes, you had to manage to make them happy. And if they weren't happy, then the whole household was in a turmoil. And their anger was usually explosive. And so that's what makes eggshells so hard to walk on. Because of that explosive anger. And you never knew when it was coming, and you wanted to protect the rest of the family from their explosive anger, or there's that anger that goes inward, that seething, quiet anger, which
The
can
silent treatment.
just as damaging.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
I had a father like that. He was angry all the time, and we were constantly walking on eggshells, and I even hid behind a door one time. Yeah.
And
I get it.
So you recognize that.
I do.
And your mother probably tippy-toed around.
Well, she just tried to keep the marriage together and make it work. That's what they did back then.
I know. And why did they do that?
I don't know. I've questioned that too.
Well, I think a lot. I'll give you the answer.
Oh, good.
A
Wonderful.
lot of it had to do with that I think in the religious world, that marriages are deified above people. And that because it was an institution, and it was an institution given by God, and it is a precious institution, but it's not to be deified above people.
Yeah.
And Christ died for people. And he didn't die for marriages.
That's right.
And I think a lot of times people will say, well, I'm staying together either for the children.
Yes.
And, you're killing the children while you're doing it, but you're staying together for the children. Or we're staying together because it won't be we're staying together. I'm holding this together because God says it's right.
And actually, the children end up with a skewed sense of what a normal relationship is like because all they've seen is the example that you've given them. And it's interesting, I was reading a woman who was discussing the marriage that she's in and very much described her husband as with the fool symptoms.
Sure.
And she said, I'm just waiting for him to die. You know how many... I thought, well, that's a little extreme.
Yeah.
But I'll bet back in the day, that a lot of that went on where people just wanted to outlast their spouse and then they could have peace.
Well, you could have peace. I knew a similar woman who was waiting on her husband to die because he was awful. And she went dancing up and down the hall with a candy bar after he passed. And I thought, and I mean, they're celebratory.
Yeah.
And, and I just thought, how terrible to have been him. I was like, and he I'm sure didn't know it, but you know, it'd be terrible to be the person that they're waiting on to die, so they can
Right.
have peace.
Yeah, that is.
Wasting their life away.
But you know what? For a normal person, it would be, oh, that's awful. I need to change.
Uh-huh.
But for the fool, they don't care.
No.
Let them worry.
Wow. Well, one of the things, and I'm going to go back to the book, if I have read the book, or I've looked deeply at my own relationships and have decided I don't want to live this way, something needs to change, it struck me that the first thing that you recommend is that people should go to God. That is where you need to start before you embark on a journey of trying to fix your fool or decide if you should stay with your fool. So do you have some recommendations you can share with our listeners on that step, finding comfort and seeking solace with God before you embark on your journey?
I think one of the best things you can do is read the Psalms.
Amen.
Just go to the Psalms and begin to read it, because that is a book that deals with emotional, relational, painful, heartfelt issues. And to find a relationship of peace with God when you are just in such turmoil in your relationship, I think is a great place to go. I personally think it is a personal thing to go there by yourself, because everybody has opinions. Your girlfriends are going to have opinions. Everybody in the church is going to have opinions. You talk to somebody, your hairdresser, they're going to have opinions.
Yes.
Everybody's going to have opinions, and they're like elbows. Everybody's got them, and so it's like you got to come back and just say, God, I'm in a mess. And just speak to me through your word. And then just start reading the Psalms. Then he'll take you other places if you need to go. But I find that is the most soothing, heart-mending place.
I agree, Jan. That's where I stayed in the Psalms. All in the same year, I got divorced, and both my parents passed away in the same year, and people didn't even know how to talk to me. But I found such solace in the book of Psalms. It's just some of the prayers that you can't even speak, they speak for you.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the Bible reads you. You can read the Bible, but the Bible reads you. And when you're in the Psalms, it's as if God is reading you and saying, "Well, honey, here's something that's deep. You need to go there."
Yeah, it's amazing how relatable it is when you sit down and you start to, it's as though he is speaking directly to you at the time that you need those words. And also, I think it helps to shut out some of those frivolous opinions that you talked about, because people who love you are going to be, death to your husband.
Right.
They're not necessarily going to give that constructive advice on moving forward, but that's a place where you can rest.
They're going to be protective of you.
Right.
And or they're going to be protective of their, if they happen to be in a religious relationship with you, they're going to be protective of the religious relationship.
Yes.
And neither of those is healthy.
Right. Jan, in your book, you describe 4 different flavors of foolishness. There is foolish by incident, foolish closed-minded, spiritually bereft, and hardened. Are we all fools in some way?
We can all do foolish things.
Yeah.
But the label of fool, and those 4 are 4 words for fool in the book of Proverbs. And you go from the silly, stupid young fool to the old, hardened, crusty fool who's sitting there with the tobacco juice running down their face, and they're saying, this is the way I am, this is the way I'm always going to be, and you're not going to change me, and me and my buddies are all going to be in hell together drinking beer. And it's like, really? And you have the young fool that they talk about, that God talks about. But there are 4 kinds of fools, but the bottom line is we're not all fools.
Yeah.
We do foolish things. If you do foolish things and you're not a fool, you think, whoa, that wasn't the smartest thing I've ever done. I need to repent of that. which means I need to change my direction.
Mm.
I may need to confess that. I may need to go to somebody and say, I am so sorry.
Yeah.
That was so foolish on my part. Plus, we do foolish things. I always laugh at one of the most foolish things I ever did, and it wasn't relational. It was just I had a bug zapper out in the yard that zapped bugs, and it was electric. And I was out there with my hose, and I was just having the best time watering flowers, and I decided to water it.
Oh.
Clean it up.
Clean it up. Well, when I did, everything went crazy, and I thought, now that was foolish.
Yeah.
And so I thought, now that was a foolish thing I won't do again.
That's right.
And so we all do foolish things, from something that's stupid to in relationships we say foolish things.
Uh-huh.
And it's like, why did I ever say that?
Right.
Well, that's when we go back and repent. Fool will never repent.
No.
Yeah, that was my distinction I was gathering from you, is that a fool doesn't know.
No.
Won't recognize that they've done a foolish thing and change. But somebody who just occasionally does a foolish thing, they know it, and
You know it immediately.
right.
Mm-hmm.
And they may not ever repeat that again because they learned that lesson. My dad always used to say, you're going to pay the stupid tax on this one.
Your dad was right.
Yeah.
There is a stupid tax.
Right.
Also, Jan, in one chapter, you talk about the fool in the mirror and the mirroring effect when dealing with our fools, which I thought was really interesting. And you recommend that we examine our own behaviors. Would you explain that concept on the fool in the mirror?
Sure. We become like what we hang around.
That's right.
And so if you hang around with a fool, and the fool's way of dealing with you is fighting, you learn to fight. If their way of dealing with you is putting you down, you learn to come back with the put down.
Mm-hmm.
You become them.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't mean you become a fool, but it means you enter in their foolish behavior, because it's that blow for blow, tit for tat.
They draw you in.
They draw you in, and we foolishly walk in. That's why we have to look in the mirror, because sometimes I'm doing the same thing he's doing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what's that about? Well, it's about trying to defend yourself. It's about trying to match their blows. You can't do it.
Right.
And really, one of the best things you can do is throw them off course and make them wonder what you're going to do.
That's a good thought.
I mean, I'm a firm believer in keeping them guessing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't ever reveal your plans, of doing the same thing over and over again.
Yeah, that's smart.
And I would think if they see they can't control you in some way and you just don't get drawn in, it's probably very confusing for them.
Very confusing. Unfortunately, it will bring a tighter control on their part.
Mm.
So you have to be prepared for that,
Mm-hmm.
because they get used to the way you behave, and they're used to the yeah and back and forth.
The more they feel like they're losing you, the tighter they're going to hold on, and the
Exactly.
more erratic they're going to behave because they have to reel you in.
And not that they want you;
Right.
it's that they want to control you.
Right.
Two different things.
It.
Two different things.
And then you have the whole aspect of when we start to focus on ourselves, and you mentioned that there's a danger in getting bogged down in regret, self-recrimination, self-pity, anger, and that a lot of people, they just freeze emotionally and they're not able to take action that they know they need to take.
Yes, I've
So-
seen that happen with many people. If you let it go on and go on and go on, and eventually you become a different person.
Mm-hmm.
And you get into the regrets, you get into the if-onlys, and you think it's too late. Often people think it's too late. It's never too late. It's never too late to do the hard thing. And if you're going to deal with a fool, you're going to do a hard thing. And sometimes the hard thing is saying no more, or it is saying, if this happens, then we're done.
Yeah.
I mean, those are,
Setting some hard boundaries.
yeah, you can give a warning. It's okay to give a warning, but don't give more than one.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow.
Don't give more than one. Don't say, well, I'm going to divorce you. Well, I'm going to divorce you. You say that more than once, you've set yourself up. And it's like, no, say it once.
Yeah.
And then if they don't respond, then go to the attorney.
Right. They have to know you mean it.
They have to know
because
you mean it.
If you say it all the time, it's meaningless. They're
Because
just, here we are again.
They say the same thing all the time.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And it keeps you controlled.
Yeah.
But it's like say what you're going to do, and then mean it, and be prepared to back it up.
Right.
Don't say it till you have the money to go to the attorney.
Right.
So it's really hard to pull yourself out of that mode of being frozen and in that self-pity and recrimination and beating yourself up. How do you start to do that if you recognize that you're doing that?
Well, one good way would be to go to people who have made it through, and you see their lives, and they pulled it together and they look good.
Yeah.
I don't mean just look good, but they're, you see their lives and you think, I could live like that.
Right.
So you look for those people. Don't look for a bunch of people sitting around petting themselves saying, oh, poor me. I mean, we all know that.
Right.
Oh, poor me. This is the end of my life and I'm the only one who's ever gone through this. No, you're not.
Yeah, no, with the divorce rate today, no, it's thousands of people.
It's like, yeah, you're just one of thousands.
There are those people who will, stay home and lay in bed, and they're not really willing to start the healing process.
No, they just enjoy the bed.
Right. Yeah. You don't want to be one of those.
No.
And look for positive influences and seek positive groups they're going to help propel you to reinvent your life.
Reinvention is a great word.
Yeah.
Because often we have to reinvent our lives. I've had to reinvent my life.
Mm-hmm.
In the last 5 years. My husband died, my son died, my grandson has cancer. I mean, it's just been yada, yada, yada. And it's like totally different life than I used to live.
Yeah.
I had, I had people around me, and I had a family, and had a house, and I have none of that now. But I'm good. I'm okay.
Right.
But I have reinvented my life. I didn't just sit and say, oh, well.
It's a different season.
Right. I didn't sit in the old house and say, well, maybe everybody's going to come home. No, they're not coming home.
Right.
So do something about it.
Right.
It's all about your perspective.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I know one thing that stood out for me is that you said the goal of seeking wisdom is not making your fool into a better person, but rather making you into a healthy, fully functional, godly person.
Exactly. Those are good words. I forgot I wrote those.
Yeah, that was so powerful because it flips that whole perspective. I'm not trying to necessarily fix that fool.
No, you're not. I mean, not even necessarily. You cannot fix.
You cannot fix that fool.
And so you let them be.
Right.
But you can look in the mirror and say, "Okay, chick, it's time to do something about this one."
Right.
And how many women never do that?
Well, they keep waiting for their fool to change, and therefore then life will be good. He'll never change. She'll never change. So therefore, no, life's not going to get good. And it wouldn't be good even if they did change, because it's about us. Mm-hmm. It's not about them.
That's powerful.
Well, along the same thought and question, you talk about roles, responsibility, and relationship. And what we have is actually defined by our fool. And so what we have is an arrangement and not a marriage or a relationship. And I know people going through separation and divorce, that's what it can morph into, an arrangement, which is at best helps them to somewhat get along. Would you give us an example and explain
what an arrangement is? Well, so many times people say, well, our relationship is just very difficult. Well, if it's consistently difficult, it's not a relationship. A relationship is built on trust. A relationship is built on a love that doesn't fail. A relationship is built on I'm more interested in you being okay than I am me. Mm-hmm. That's a relationship. An arrangement is, okay, we find ourselves in this thing together. Now, you do this and I'll do that. But it's an arrangement. Mm-hmm. And it's an arrangement that can be broken at any time.
Right.
And that's why divorce is so so desirable for so many people is because they, it was an arrangement. I met a young woman. She was a server at a restaurant, and just a sweet, precious girl. And she said her boyfriend had come in from out of town, and at the restaurant, and they were greeting each other. And so we were talking to her about him. But she says, well, I was married for 8 years, but that didn't work out. And she had 2 children. She says, that didn't work out, so I got a divorce. And she says, I probably won't get married again. But I've got a boyfriend.
Yeah.
And what I loved about it, she says, my mother asked me what I intend to do. In other words, do you plan to get married? And she was, no. Mm-mm.
Wow.
And so life's just going to go on. But she just dismissed the 8 years
Mm-hmm.
and the father of her children. And that just didn't work out.
Yeah.
And that was an arrangement.
Uh-huh.
That was not a relationship.
Yeah.
Or she couldn't have been that cavalier about it.
No, it makes you wonder, does she even recognize why it didn't work out? Has she perhaps not examined herself for what role that she played, or was she the fool or was he the fool? But
And in 5 minutes,
you can't find that out, right?
She was lovely.
I would be like, sit down. I want to.
Yeah, let's have a chat.
Let's have a chat.
But she was lovely.
Yeah.
I mean, I really liked her. She was charming. But what went on?
Mm-hmm.
It was an arrangement.
Mm-hmm.
They were probably physically drawn to each other,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what happens with
I know.
arrangement. People are physically drawn to each other, and they call that love.
Mm-hmm.
That's called LUST.
Right. They never connect mentally or emotionally. It's all about the skin-to-skin contact.
All right, and then they find out they really don't like each other mentally or emotionally.
Right.
But they like the skin to skin.
Right. Yep.
And it's like, well, that's great, but that doesn't last.
Right.
It happens all the time.
What was the old saying? Sex don't last, cooking do.
Yeah.
Because that's part of a relationship. You cook for them.
That's right.
You have dinner together. That's a relationship, as opposed to just the sexual part of it.
Right. Right. So, Jan, if you work hard to control your fool and you realize that your life, your thoughts, prayers, or even your personality are dominated by your fool, how do you reconcile when it's time to let go?
That's a hard one.
Yeah.
That's a hard one. I think that's when you have to just, first of all, be sure. Be sure that it's not just you just got mad, because it's easy.
Yeah.
It's easy to get mad, as we say. It's easy to be angry, or be angry about something that he won't change or she won't change, or just be irritated with him. Just don't like him. Just decide you don't like him. And a lot of times, that's a passing thing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can't be with somebody on an ongoing basis and at some point not like them.
Mm-hmm.
Because we're human and we rub up against each other, and it's like, I don't like you.
Right.
But get past it if it's a relationship.
Right.
If it's an arrangement, I don't know. I don't like this arrangement.
Right.
And so when to get out of it, I think is a very personal thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a point in time. I believe you come to a point in time, this is what I've seen, when something either snaps or the switch flips. And it's like, now's the time.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll know. There's a knowing.
Absolutely.
And once you know, do something about it.
Mm-hmm.
So is that after that you have decided to do a little bit of work, as we talked about previously, and spent some time with your faith and getting closer to understanding yourself?
Absolutely. Understand yourself first. And that's, I think, that goes back to the Psalms. And you start dealing with God and saying, what am I contributing to this difficulty? I'm certainly capable. What am I doing? And then I think God graciously walks you through, and He'll tell you when it's time. It's just like there's a release. There's no longer an obligation. There's nothing there. Once I agree, you've walked through and you've checked yourself out.
Right.
And done some work. I mean, this is when going to a therapist, going to a counselor, going to someone who can help you figure yourself out. Because I see healing starts when I begin to talk to someone who says, I'm not worried about him, I need to work on me.
Mm-hmm.
Then we work on them, we walk them through, and then they get to a point where they realize this is
Right.
you know. But you don't do it cavalierly, you don't do it lightly,
Right.
and you never do it when you're mad.
Mm-mm. And get a peace about it.
Right.
And you've shared some great resources on where to go. We'd be curious, in your experience, Jan, what type of behaviors do you see from the fool when the woman has done that work, or the other way around, the man has done that work, they've made peace, and they know they need to take this next step to seek a divorce. What can you expect the fool to do? What should you be prepared for?
Good point.
Be prepared for them to be angry, and or for them to become very pitiful. I can't believe that you would leave me.
Mm-hmm.
Play on your emotions.
I have treated you like a rag doll for the last 30 years, and I've treated you poorly. But I can't believe you'd leave me after all this time we spent together. They get pitiful and humble down, sort of, until they see that you are,
It's not going to work.
that you mean business, and then
Right.
you'll see the old grrr come out.
Yeah.
And then they rise up again, and then they get hard to deal with.
Mm.
Then they get, they're going to take every penny they can take.
The greed.
They're going to hide every everything they make. I mean,
Every asset.
yeah. I mean, it gets ugly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they go from pitiful to ugly usually.
Real fast.
Yeah. And you never know on what day, so you better deal with them while they're pitiful. Yeah.
Right. It's helpful just to know that expect this is going to happen.
Oh, expect it.
Yeah.
They're going to be, and you're going to feel so guilty in some ways. I mean, you know the truth, but then you see this person who's pitiful, and you think something within you. Any normal person would think, well, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Don't believe it.
Well, especially if you're an empath.
Oh my, that's the worst.
Right.
It's like,
That's why you stayed most of the time,
Right.
right? Too
that's why
much.
you stay,
Right.
you know? And then it becomes like, oh, well, and you have to challenge your own empath nature.
Mm-hmm.
You have to challenge yourself, and it's the hardest for the empath. And I don't happen to be one, so. But I have seen the struggle, and I think, why can't you do this?
Wow.
And there's a reason. It's that, oh, I feel sorry,
Right.
and I want to heal. Well,
And they don't. Yeah.
no.
So that's-
It goes back to, they always think they're right.
Mm-hmm.
They have no reason to heal.
Well, as you mentioned, that's why it's important to stay with a counselor.
Yes.
Stay with maybe even your pastor or whoever is going to help you think through it so that you stay on the right path.
And may I say, stay if it's with a pastor. He doesn't need to be an empath too.
Oh, right.
I mean, that's the worst combination in the world, because then he gets all sorry about it.
Yeah.
And he wants to keep this marriage together. And old Sam over here has got to, he's turned around. He's a good fella. And the bottom line is, no, he's not.
No, he's not. So maybe not.
So I would
not
go
the
with
pastor.
a counselor,
Right.
who has the experience and the wisdom and knows how to see through that stuff.
That makes a lot of sense.
Because, oh my goodness, I've seen so many, and this is women. I have seen women with a group of men, or a man or a group of men in authority, who will automatically go to the man who is looking pitiful.
Yeah.
Well,
Think-
it's like women. Women hang with women.
Women,
Men are
right.
going to hang with men.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I don't know that you go to a bunch of men
Yeah.
Right.
to say, I need your help.
Uh-huh. Wow.
Doesn't always work.
That's good. Well,
Well, this has been a great topic and just good information. And as a takeaway, I do want to mention that Jan has designed this book Foolproofing Your Life as a workbook. And as you read, there are some prompts to help you dive deeper and relate the book to your own story. It's a book that you will want to return to again and again. I know I do. And Jan, we are just so very happy you joined us today, and I know you have helped our listeners to find help and direction with the difficult people in their life.
I hope so.
Yes.
It's been fun being with you all.
Well, thank you.
Well, and I'll echo that. I found with the book, it was wonderful to have the prompts, the questions, so that you could go back to it time and time again. So thank you. Well, I would ask our listeners to join us on the next episode of the Silver Divorce Podcast and make sure that you subscribe. We welcome any questions that you might have, topic suggestions, ideas. Email us at silverdivorcepodcast@gmail.com. Also, would you kindly leave us a rating and a review? Ratings and reviews are very important to grow the podcast and also help us to attract great guests like Jan. So, whether you are considering divorce or you are newly in the divorce process, we'll help you navigate and tell you things your attorney might not tell you. Until next time, remember, divorce is an event. It does not define who you are. I'm Lisa.
And I'm Pat.
I'll see you next time.